Part of the job, right? Let me start the event.
Good day, good day.
Bonecracker,
Let's go.
you managed to join us today. That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
Awesome. Hope
Thursday
so.
evenings are difficult, but I'm here.
Oh man,
How you
I
doing?
super happy you took the time to be with us today. And I was telling the boys that I got approval from Danny to share something really cool. The first actual lore alpha that I'll be able to share. And it's the first time that I'm opening up a piece of the Star Atlas timeline for people outside of Automata. So yeah, I'm super excited for that. Um, let's wait maybe 1-2 minutes to have other people join us. Hey Falcor, John Carlos, Cosmo. Nice to have you guys here. We have lots of stuff to talk about today. I mean, I think I messed it up on when I chose this topic because this topic is pretty much it's enormous, right? We have so many different factions in the medium risk zone that maybe I have enough content to talk about like most of them, not most of them, but like 30% of them for an entire episode. So, what I'm going to do today is first of all explain the story of the medium risk zone, uh, starting the period of the Convergence War, and actually starting before the Convergence War, how everything started. Uh, one thing that is looking forward to it have organized fleets based on banished factions alignment. Yeah, man, this is hopefully the game design will allow us to do that because that's entirely on my plans. Like, I want you guys to be able to align yourselves with factions in the medium zone. Uh, there is many different types of factions in the medium zone, and Star Atlas is all about freedom, right? So I want you guys to be able to find the group of people that you identify yourselves with and be able to foster their agenda in the galaxy, right? I feel that this is the kind of experience that will create true game immersion. So I feel like lots of the players that came to Star Atlas came for this kind of gameplay loop. So that's what we are trying to build here. But yep, I feel we probably can get started. Welcome everyone. This is the Lore Keepers meeting number 4. And today, your penguin host has chosen to talk about the Midjourey Zone. And I was saying in the introduction, this is an enormous topic. Like, we have so many different factions in the Midjourey Zone that it would probably take us the entire year just to talk about the factions that lives in the mud territory. But today, what I'm going to do is start talking about the history of the Medium Risk Zone and how it was before the factions ascended, uh, how things worked during the Convergence War, and how things are working out in the previous timeline, in the current timeline. So, but before we start, I was telling the guys that today Danny allowed me to do something super cool, something that I wanted to do for a long while, and that is sharing a little bit of our timeline. So I got you guys a screenshot of pieces of the Star Atlas complete timeline, just so you guys can have an idea of how we are doing things here. and how I try to keep everything in place when I'm doing our timelines. So this is a small tease. You guys can see on the Atlas Brew launch right now. I posted a picture of this. If you guys are wondering, you guys, if you guys have interest in writing lore and creating stories and things like that, the app that I'm using is called Ion Timeline. And bro, this is super helpful. Like this app allows me to create characters, allow me to create locations, factions, political groups, and have everything in place, tie everything together. I have different colors for different types of events. And I tried to erase the most dangerous entries that I didn't want you guys to learn about. But here, I also let a few uh, small entries for our lore loving community members uh, to check out and to decipher or try to see what we can do. Oh, actually, I have a better one. Hold on, I sent the wrong one. It's this. Here. And the reason why I wanted to actually share the second picture is because you guys can see that those events that appear on screen, they are like the first entries that happen in the time span from 2461 to 2581. So uh, it would be possible to scroll down so you guys would see like how many entries I have just on this period of wholly 100 years. But yeah, everything that comes into my mind, everything that I imagine, everything that I think, this is cool, I write an entry on the lore timeline. And then I start connecting it with other things in the universe of Star Atlas. I segregate them by colors, each one meaning different types of events or different types of factions that are intertwined with this event. So yeah, and most of those entries that you guys see right now, they are directly linked with what we are going to talk about here today, which is the medium risk zone. So I think we should get started. You guys, while I while I do this brief introduction about the history of the medium risk zone, you guys feel free to browse through this pic, remembering that I prefer if you guys don't go sharing stuff from the lore brew outside of the lore channel. So, yep. Uh, but all of this is lore alpha. This is actually our main timeline. Those events are canon. X is not okay. But you can call people to come watch the lore keepers meeting on X if you guys feel it's cool enough. All right. So let's start talking about the medium risk zone and the history of everything that happened in Galia Expanse. From the previous meetings that we had, you guys learned, and of course you guys know about the general Star Atlas lore, that the universe of Star Atlas has a past before it. So we have many events that happened before the current faction order, and we have a few events that will happen in the future that I'm already working on. And one of the one of the first things that I would like to say is that the medium risk zone, it had a couple empires, it had a couple civilizations, and a few of them managed to reach space age technology. And I'm sure you guys have seen at least one of them before. when I talk about uh, Incubus and Kadar MRZ-28. Those are empires that existed before the current faction order, but mysteriously they have collapsed. Like none of the powers that existed before in the Medium Risk Zone survived to intertwine or to talk or to influence the ascension of the current faction order. Not to say that they weren't influenced by other civilizations at all. And we have some cases of this happening. If you guys remember the Mieris lore, I have pointed out that they were visited about by different alien species. As we spoke during the Photoli brew, we have seen that the Photolis have interfered with some species, like the Lumikir, for example. But overall, the current state of affairs in Galia Expanse is mostly decided by what happened to the factions. And when I talk about the factions here, I'm talking about the big three factions, Mud, Oni, and Ustur, during the period of the Convergence War. Uh, Alright, so you guys know this already. What happened in the early days after the main factions ascended to the stars is that they, one way or another, and when I mean they, I mean their species, their civilizations, not necessarily their political order, because, for example, the Oni Consortium was created much later on, uh, during the Convergence War, but the factions, the species that compounds the factions, they had expanded their influence one way or another to the territories in the Medium Risk Zone. And the classic example of this, and let's say the most prominent, the more the more tragic example of this was what happened with the Mud civilization. Uh, we can say that what happened with the Mud was that their colonies were highly dependent on the the capital, on the Exodus sector influence. Following the ethos of hyper specialization, what mostly happened is that each one of the colonies of the Mud Empire here was super focused on what they did best. So we have like places like Xianing, which was highly effective as a military order. We had Pergamos, which was a financial center for the whole region uh, of the galaxy there. We had Abid, which ended up being a exploration colony. It was super resourceful. It has many different materials and rare resources to that extent. So the Mud, they created a centralized order there, and this centralized order relied on their colonies to provide cheap goods, and they would provide the technology and overall manpower coordination to make things work. And this worked really well for a long amount of time. In fact, in the years that preceded the Convergence War, you could say with a high level of trust that the Muds were the strongest faction in Galia Expanse. Mainly because this model of colonization uh, in Galia, and the fact that they were eagerly searching for the promised land that God had promised them when they ascended to the stars. Uh, yes, I see. I was just commenting on before you got on. This is a small sneak peek on the lore timeline. I shared 100 years uh, of the top entries. If you scroll down, there would be a lot more entries, but this is what's look like from my perspective, Galia expense. And just as another small alpha today, this is something that you guys will discover soon enough anyway. I was writing about the first generation faction leaders, and it's super interesting when you try to imagine how the different civilizations worked and try to come up with different logics for them. So now I have something really cool, which are the first generation faction leaders, and I want to see how you guys will react when you learn about how, for example, the the leader of the Ustur, uh, Mother Coven Elder, created the whole Elder Order, created the path of enlightenment, how she shaped the Ustur philosophy and religion. But yeah, I'm starting to digress here. Uh, you guys will learn soon enough anyway how the different faction leaders influence the outcome of their factions. But yeah, going back to our topic at hand, the Middle Rift Zone was pretty much stable during the period of the that was right before the Convergence War. And I mean, there were civilizations and there was sentient beings, and there, like, they had their own planets, their own logics, but most of them, like nearly the overwhelming majority of them, didn't have the technology to stand against the forces of the Usturs, the Muds, other species that stood under the flag of the Oni Consortium. So, those three forces, they molded the galaxy. They molded the galaxy, they created their orders, they even established rules to engage with one another before the Council of Peace, and things were working more or less fine. Until the day where Ahmad and his friends decided to sell the information about the location of Iris to the heads of the three different factions. And as you guys know, sparked the Convergence War, and those territories, the man, June have killed by himself, if we think about that, billions of intelligent beings. Like, if there is an afterlife for the Muds in the Stratos universe, I don't think June will be super beloved there. But yeah, when this happened, when the Convergence War happened, the different factions used the planets, the sectors under their care as pieces of war. So we saw things like the supply chains being built aggressively to support the the invasion of the area that we know now as the high risk zone. So the resources were being depredated from the planets in the area of the medium risk zone, channeled all the way to the battlefronts in the high risk zone. The populations of those planets were the first ones in the line of fire during the Convergence War. So it was devastating for the civilizations in the medium risk zone. Like, most of them were under the banner of one of the factions, and their economies, their populations, pretty much everything was destroyed. Differently from the populations in the safe zone, which were very far from the battlefronts. So it was an entirely different situation. This created a lot of bad blood between the factions of the medium risk zone and the safe zone. And especially when the Convergence War ends, what the factions do is like, hey guys, everyone now is free. Go enjoy your freedom. You guys are autonomous now. GG, have fun. and they got the resources that the few resources that were left. They take this back to their home systems, to the safe zone, and they start rebuilding their economies, their systems, and their overall infrastructure. You guys can imagine that this made lots of people pretty much mad and resentful in the medium risk zone. And the different factions, uh, this of course, there were exceptions, and different factions had different dealings with their populations in the medium risk zone. For example, in the Ustur case, we saw many people that were key in the elder order of the Usturs leave the main faction political power and create their own civilizations, their own governments outside of the Ustur political order and their collective conscience. One case of that is the Amphoil states. Yep, you got it, Mustache. I even have this one here, I guess, in this sneak peek that I showed you guys here. Let's see, yes, on year 2532, uh, the Amphoil states left the Ustur Elder Order, founding their own government, which they call the meritocratic technate political model. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. This is one of my favorite characters in Star Atlas. He is the disciple of Army Elder. Uh, and he's a really cool guy, and he's a really good friend, or was a really good friend, of another very important character in the Ustur lore, which you guys know as well, called Kior Elder, who is the leader of Zenith Door, another system in the Ustur state. In the Mud sector, the situation was much more dire. The ex-colonies of the Muds, uh, maybe not redone, but all the other ex-colonies of the Muds, they hate the factions to their guts. Like they hated the Muds. They had because they were explored, they were killed, they were left to fend themselves for years to come. And the one person who managed to, ease the situation by making many different concessions to some extent was Sharon Goethe Jr. So she's a natural inborn diplomat. You guys will see lots of her influence in the future of gameplay modes associated with the medium risk zone, especially in the mud territory. She was the one that pretty much prevented the mud ex colonists from attacking Exodus and the Volant station mothership. So there is still a lot of bad blood between them. And this is something that I even spoke with Chip and the others. Like when we have planet colonization, I feel like we need a lore event of a war between Muds and their ex colonies or something like that to make sure that, or some sort of peace agreement, peace seeking quests to make amends for the situation that was left there in the lore background. The Oni territory is a very different case because in the Oni territory, we don't have a lot of civilizations or autonomous civilizations. We had Frenir, we had some other groups, but overall, the Oni territory was the one that had the least conflict between their, let's say, metropolis and their colonies, simply because the Oni territories, the Oni faction overall, they don't have a policy of interfering too much with the colonies in the lore. That's not to say there are no problems from that situation. And one of those one of those effects of the this kind of policy is that on Fenrir, one of the Oni territories, they had one of the biggest slavers states in the whole Galia expanse. Like there was lots of slavers, overlords that were stationed there. It was a sector where slavery was accepted, and this only ended uh, in the current days of Star Atlas, like after Valor uh, uh, after Valor attacked the Fenrir state. That's when those kind of things were pretty much extinguished. Uh, the Mustache is asking, wait, I thought the Sogmians almost took over all of Oni territory. That's why Akalma Exile was there, like they conquered most other species. Yeah, what happened in Akalma Exile was something very particular to the Oni civilization, to the Sogmian civilization per se, Mustache. As you guys know what he's talking about, the Sogmian civilization, we spoke about this on the lore keepers meeting about Sogmians. They had a very deadly civil war, and the people from the House Akalma, they fled the territories from the Sogmians and settled down on Akalma Isle. What happens here, and this is one of the groups that we are going to talk about today, so I'll just get into them now since you mentioned them. What happened with them was that during the Convergence War, Sogmians are being destroyed, Paizu is killed, and something happens on this story. This is a story that will be portrayed with more details on Core, but most of the people in the galaxy believes that the responsibles for killing Paizu are members from Akalma's house. So what happens is that after the Convergence War, like not necessarily after, in the last days of the Convergence War, Bekalu gets his fleet, he gets his Titan ship, and after fending off both the Mud and the Ustur from the Oni territories, he goes to a calm exile and he starts destroying the whole planet. Like, and here when we are talking about that, we are talking about what Rome did to Carthago uh, in the mythical age. Like they threw salt to the land, they made sure that nothing could grow there, and they declared that zone as forbidden, as cursed. That's why no Oni goes there, because the Oni feels the hatred and the darkness that lives there. The Mud didn't care too much about this because they found some interesting resources there, so they colonized the sector. But that's the reason why Akam Exile is on Mud territory. But you are correct. Most of the planets that the Sogmians had, they were ruled to some extent. But after the Convergence War, the Onis didn't have, only the Sogmians had some degree of, let's say, control over the colonies. Nothing like the Muds, like they weren't like the Muds. Yeah, south to the earth. Yeah, that's the vibe. But yeah, the Muds were the ones that were doing super strong exploitation control of their colonies. But yeah, the Onis had fewer problems due to resentment on their median zone, but this had consequences as well. Since they had this not overseeing policy. They they had things like slavers. They had things like EU law, like cartels forming, uh, individuals exploiting populations there. Civilization is much less developed on the Oni state, on the medium risk zone. So yeah, different outcomes, different policies, uh, and different stories for each one of the factions. And now I'm going to start talking about what happened due to this situation. So the medium risk the medium zone populations were left to fend for themselves, and this this caused massive conflicts overall Galia expense. Like I think there is even on the picture that I shared with you guys a few of those examples. Like on year 2529, Xianyang pivots into military dictatorship to face off the chaotic state of the medium risk zone after the Convergence War. Micenas 5 is raided by alien pirates. Chaos falls in the sector. So when the Convergence War ends, and if you guys see the light blue slash green entries here, they are entries associated with the Convergence War in my timeline. Everyone in the galaxy starts fending for themselves, especially the medium risk zone factions. And one of the most preeminent the two most preeminent factions that arose from the Convergence War are, without doubt, the Jorvik and the Ecos faction. Both of them with very distinct histories, but both of them might be probably the ones that undercoats profitable the most from the conflicts of the Convergence War. I would like to start with the Jorvik faction, but before I do that, do you guys have any questions? Because I feel like I have been speaking for 34 minutes without letting you guys say anything. So if you have any questions, and you can ask about any faction, any group, any person in the medium risk zone, please feel free to do that while I drink some water. I see a couple people writing on the chat. So, are Jorvik humans? That's a great question. Uh, the Jorvik, they are formed from people from any species out the Jorvik, the Sagmian pirate raider that's current issue in the medium reason for Onis. Okay, let's talk about the questions are intertwined to some extent. Create a crew member pop band. That would be awesome. So I see you guys want to know about the Jorviks. So the Jorviks, they are for sure a clear subproduct of the chaos and destruction that happened during the Convergence War. The Jorvik appear in the universe of Star Atlas during the, let's say, the last part of the Convergence War, when the factions are already starting to show signs of exhaustion. Uh, the high risk zone is pretty much no man lands already, save from the few battlefronts that are still ongoing between the factions. And on that environment, a very special individual starts acquiring influence and expanding his his message, his speech, his plans for the group of people. And that man is known in Gallia Expanse as the Pirate King. What happens during this period in the Convergence War is that the planets and the populations of the high risk zone that had totally collapsed at this point, they had zero hope. Like they had no one to turn to. They were left to their own device. Most of their worlds dying out of hunger, out of lack of fuel, and things like that. Like imagine what would happen in Sage Labs should there be no players doing anything. Like of course all the star bases start stopping to function. And that's pretty much what happened here when the fact at the end of the Convergence War. And this guy comes and he starts assaulting the harbors and the stashes of technology of the different factions in the high risk zone. He has a high degree of inner knowledge about where the most uh, important pieces of technology of the different factions are. So he starts calling people to join him. And he starts saying that this so-called order of the factions, it's a rust, it's a rug, it's a fallacy. He says that any society that relies on rules, on centralized power, uh, is not something that is not something legit. It's just an exercise of force, and if people are exercising force to control others, then he would stand up and use his force to protect himself and the ones that he cared about. And thus, he creates the Jorvik from the ashes of these of the like the remains of the bases of the factions in the high risk zone. So he starts getting more people, he starts getting supplies, he starts creating some sort of chaotic, decentralized order to some places in the high risk zone. And the people who were there pretty much dying, starving, cold, they start adoring this guy like a god, like a hero. And but he doesn't like that. He doesn't agree with this title, but he understands the strength of being a symbol. So they start growing, they start acquiring more planets that support them, and a piece of their host. I didn't, VB. I didn't have time. But a piece of the Jorvik Armada detaches itself and goes to the medium risk zone. And what they find there when they come back from the high risk zone is that they find the galaxy in shambles, they see groups fighting each other, and this piece of the of the Jorvik Armada, they start setting supply lines. They start offering protection for planets, for political groups. They start interfering. They start filling the void that the factions left behind at the end of the Convergence War. So the people in the high risk, in the medium zone that were supported by them defend the Jorviks. And the same thing happened with the Echo's fleet. When the Echoes arrived in in Galia Expanse, after they broke up with the Mud, they weren't. They were more a group of researchers and hippies. Like they had their ideals. They were not fighters, but they had some very capable scientists among them. One of them being Hugh Harper Halley, as you guys know, the founder of the Ecos. And what they do is that first they start to establish their bases in Galia Expanse. And how the Ecos work. It's not that everyone loves them, a mustache. Of course, and this is something that it's important to highlight. It's not like the Jarvik and the Eagles are good. They have agendas, like pretty much anyone in Star Atlas does. And they supported a few people, but along the way, they killed many others. They uh, they ransacked places, they killed people. The Eagles, for example, and this was one of the examples that I was going to give you. They believe that the protagonists of the galaxy in a higher order are the planets. So the people, we, the sentient beings, we are like minor life forms, pretty much like virus and bacterias. And some bacteria can be good, but some bacteria can be bad for the body, right? And the Ecos believe that the populations in the planets, the sentient beings, they are somewhat like these for the planets. So what they do, they try to doctrinate everyone to be good bacterias. We can say it like that to the planets. Like you need to protect the planet, you need to not overuse their resources, etc., etc. But the planets, they are the ones that matter. And when one population starts messing up too badly with their planets, the Ecos goes there and destroys them. And this actually happened in a very calamitous way on the area that we know as Old Grove in the starbase in Sage map. What happened there is that there was a native species that was uh yeah, making friends made them enemies as well. Absolutely, Mustache. And what happened there was that they found a sentient species that was pretty advanced on chemicals and overall distributing. And those people, the eco saw that they were going in the same path as humanity did when we destroyed planet Earth. So they saw that and they went to Old Grove and said, "Guys, you guys are messing with the planet. Stop this. This is going to kill the planet." The population there, they didn't know ecos, didn't know humans, and they say, "What the fuck? Get the hell out of here. This is our planet. We do what we want." The ecos came and said, "Man, if we start doing that, we'll need to take action." I'll get there, Mustache. This is actually something that I want to talk about. I'll get there. So what happened was, okay, you guys won't stop? Fine. Deikos goes and start testing their new technology that they had developed, the terraforming bombs, uh, and they turned the planet green. But something happened along the way. Like, what happened was that the planet turned into a verdant nightmare. Uh, the Eagles, yeah, those were the legacy terraforming bombs. The Eagles were still developing the technology, and something went very wrong. If you go there right now on Old Grove, it's one of the most dangerous places in Galia Expanse. Like, it's it's there are like very few settlements there, and they have enormous uh, shields that needs to be maintained. Otherwise, you get wrecked like in a few seconds. So the eagles destroyed an entire species there. And they created monsters that roam the planet. And, you know, this happens on the eagles. But the eagles, pretty much like the Jarvik, and this is something important that I need to highlight to you guys, uh, is that they have decentralized order. So you can have a Jarvik that will be super compassionate by his standards, and you can have someone that will rape and kill children and things like that. Those are extremes, but they coexist in those decentralized orders. In the ecos case, the way that ecos work is that the ecos they follow a doctrine of a, a matriarchy. I don't know how to pronounce this word in English. Sorry, guys, but they have matriarchs that call themselves druids. And what happens is that when you become a druids, you must leave the grove, and they call their groves their zone of influence in Galia Expanse. You must leave this grove, take a few people with you, and found another grove. Yeah, inspired in the old druids of the Celtic mythology. So, whenever a druidess is formed, she goes, she takes a few males and females with her, and they found a new society in a planet, in a spaceship, and their mission is to grow their influence and spread the gospel of this new Gaia theory where the planets are the protagonists of the galactic order. Uh, and this is pretty interesting because the Ecos believe in their hearts that they have discovered a way to communicate with planets. So they talk like they talk to planets and they hear the planet's answers through a weird machine that they have. If that's true or not, you guys will tell me when you play Star Atlas and you hear the planet answering you back. So you tell me if it's true or not. Yeah, I don't want to give you guys like canonic answers about those kind of stuff. I think it's more fun if you guys discover for yourselves when you are playing Star Atlas and exploring the galaxy. But yeah, and what happened here after the Ecos messed up, pretty much destroying entire civilization and things like that, was that they focused their efforts on producing food. It resembles the Bene Gesserit to some extent, but they don't have the powers or the knowledge of the Bene Gesserit. It's like they are. It's a very interesting fusion of hippies and farmers and scientists trying to colonize Gaia Expanse to some extent. And those guys, they focused most of their efforts on producing food. So wherever they go, they bring new techniques of food production with them. And they discovered that in a galaxy destroyed by war, hunger and the ability to produce food, even in harsh environments, is a great asset to move people in your favor, right? So uh, the Ecos goes there on their pilgrimage, bringing those technologies, bringing their gospel of the planets, this Neo Gaia theory, and they have found lots of support in the Medium Risk Zone. And that's one of the reasons why the Council of Peace, and especially the Mud, simply don't go to High Garden and wipe out the Ecos. Like, much of the hungry bellies in the medium risk zone uh, look forward to the ecos. So this created some sort of insurance for them that allowed them to thrive in the medium risk zone. And Mustache touched something that I wanted to talk about. I had conversations with Danny about this. Like, over mining can be bad for you in terms of relationships with ecos. Like their faction. Uh, and we want to, in the future, create games mechanisms where there would be ways for you to, when you go too strong on the mining, you can go in a kind of overdrive uh, on the planet's extraction. And this would cause the echoes to send you warnings and even go after you and start attacking you. Do they make efforts to impose rules, laws, taxes in areas that they control? They try to steer away from that groove. Like, for example, if there's a planet that was colonized by ecos, like without any other sentient being, yes, there will be some sort of rule, laws, taxes that will go for the overall faction benefit. But mostly, they try to be more subtle on their influence, like by trading, by conversion, and things like that. But if you mess up too much in the planet, and we'll have in-game mechanics for this in the far future, like you can go full exploitation on your planet, this would attract uh, the ecos to go after you and even attack you, creating some sort of balance in-game through a very interesting gameplay loop. Farming can be exploitive as well, Mustache. You know, it's not a matter. It's a matter of exploring the planet. So, yeah, Grove, this is the kind of discussion that we have during lore meetings, and the cool stuff's that, yeah, great way to break up mining monopolies. Yes, like if you mess up too much, if you have like an enormous operation that is destroying several planets, you can be 100% sure that the ecos will come after you to attack you. And the Jarvik, on the other hand, they play also their agenda on the other front. So, if for example, you start accruing too much relationship with the Council of Peace, with other factions, if you start oppressing Jarvik territories or people that are under their protection, the Jarvik will start raiding your territories as well. So we want to create equilibrium in game by having these sorts of gameplay loops in the future. And this is a great opportunity for us to create systems like faction, what's the name that I'm looking for? Relationships like farming reputation with them or losing and making enemies of the factions. And this will open up different paths for players to acquire different resources. So, for example, let's say you are on the top 100 relationship with the ecos. So you would have access to ecos only stuff, even clothes, seeds, and things like that. So these are some ways that we see the lore intertwining with the different aspects of game design. And I feel it's going to be super fun when you are there mining and suddenly you see a bombarella or a fleet of bombarellas appear in your sky saying, down to the predator, and things like that. I think it's going to be fun. Since we are nearing the top of the hour, and I have been speaking non-stop right now, do you guys have any questions about Ecos or Jarvix? I feel that I can't open up another topic without and provide context in the minutes that we have, so I feel we should focus on questions right now, and then the next meeting we can go deeper into the lessers. Exactly, Groove. I don't know why you guys think that I have this desire to destroy things, you know. I mean, it's all about balance, right? You guys create, someone needs to destroy. It's just how life is.
Hey, Jose, this is a tangential question, I guess. And perhaps something that goes beyond the lore, but nonetheless, it just popped up again in my head now you were talking about this. do you know if the team is considering people gaining enough reputation with Jorvik or Eagles that they completely abandon Council of Peace and become like factionless, or perhaps like a minor faction kind of uh, yeah, civilian or something like that?
This is a great question, Funkcracker, and I'll answer my feelings, and then I can give you my opinion on other team members. Don't take this as true because this is my interpretation of how they are feeling about this subject. And as things move forward, you guys know things are bound and will probably change. For me, in the future, you can there should be a threshold where you get enough reputation with the Eagles, the Jarvik, and even other minor faction, uh, like even high risk zone factions, that you leave your faction and belong a member of that faction or that political group. Not necessarily you need to part ways with your main faction, maybe, but I would prefer if that was the case. I feel like allowing players to have more political groups, although this will be painful for you as a player, I feel this would be cool. Like, for example, let's
Agreed.
say you become a Jarvik, right? You'll be automatically excluded from all the galactic marketplace trades. Like, you won't be able to access worlds that belongs to the Council of Peace and things like that. On the other hand, this opens up a path where you can focus on attacking other players, doing Jarvik quests and things like that. It will be a huge trade-off. Like going outside the Council of Peace protection for me is like starting to play in the when the game has a hard you have the normal difficulty, you have the
Hardcore,
hardcore, yeah, the hardcore. You'll be
real
hardcore.
stakes.
Yeah, exactly. Like you
Love it.
probably won't be able to leave most of the star systems that the Jarvik won without getting killed on sight. Is this something that we want to allow players to experience? That's a great question. For
Yes,
me,
yes.
the answer is yes. But how would this affect the normal player in Star Atlas? And there would be lots of disclaimers saying, hey, if you make this choice, there won't be coming back, or coming back would be super hard. So are you sure you want to do this? Things like that.
Yeah, I
But
think
for
like the high risk zone, right? If you enter that similar system, indeed, there's no way back. Think carefully, but yeah,
yeah, but maybe you can get back from the high risk zone and survive. Like this is the decision that would constrain your wallet by
perhaps
politically
you can go
speaking, you know?
undercover and pretend you are Jorvik, but still secretly a mud agent.
Oh, that would be even harder to do, I guess. But
For sure.
maybe. But yeah, those are things that I would love to see in the future, to be honest. Uh, and who knows? Maybe one of the players' decks becomes so strong in terms of territory, political power, influence, and etc., that they can ally themselves with a faction or even think about creating their own factions. For me, there is no problem there. Like in the lore perspective, for me, if it's Jarvik, if it's a guild, a player's guild, this doesn't bother me at all. I feel like this is the natural progression of the vision that we have for Stratlas. But I realize that this is a much bigger problem for our economists and people like that. Like imagine the liquidity on the Jarvik markets compared to the liquidity on the Council of Peace factions and things like that. Those are all things that we need to be aware about once we introduce this kind of mechanics to the game. But yep, excellent question. Any other question, guys? Uh, that you wanna ask about this topic overall before we close? Did you guys like this by anyway? Did you guys like this model? I feel like I chose a very big topic, so it was kind of hard to condense everything. I'll try to steer to a more strict agenda next time.
Awesome
Like,
stuff. Exactly.
oh, thank you guys. Awesome. So probably, uh, I'll ask here what you guys prefer. We go back to Oni civilization and we talk about Punabs, or we stick to medium risk zone and we start talking about the minor factions in the medium risk zone. It's up to you guys. Let me know in the chat what you guys prefer. We have a vote for medium risk zone. Chadix wants Punabs. It's a tough call. Punabs are super cool, but also there's lots to learn about medium risk zone. So, yep, tough call. I'll see you. There's sure lots of freedom. If there's one place that's free in Star Atlas universe, is the medium risk zone. I mean, high risk zone is even freer, but yeah, yeah, Brogan, Earth is gone. Uh, I mean, we still have some pieces of it floating in the mothership, the CSS mothership Serene. Something brutal like a dark faction, like people who do blood sacrifices, kill people, things like that. There are a couple groups like that in Star Atlas. We can talk about them. Oxir, High Risk Zone faction. Oxir is a very interesting group. Maybe we can talk about. Alright, you know what? I'm going to pick 3 minor factions for us to talk about. Some of the ones that I like the most. And we'll go on a deep dive about them in the next Lore Keepers episode. Alright, guys? Man, thank you all for being here with us, talking about the lore. Super cool to have to take some time to simply go into the lore. Hopefully, you guys had a good time as well. Uh, please don't share my lore diagram around. You know what? I'm going to delete it. You guys who was here saw, who wasn't will never see. But yeah, maybe in the future I'll be able to share some other insights and more entries of the lore timeline. My dream, and this is something that we'll do internally at some point, is to make all this timeline, all the events available in a website or an app or something like that, and you guys will be able to click on them and expand and learn more about each one of the entries. All right, guys. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure be here with you. Uh, and yeah, enjoy your day. We are working hard. The next wave of updates and cool news. A town hall might be on the horizon. So yeah, feeling super hopeful now. All right, guys. Have a good day. Love you all. See ya.
You too, mate. Thanks a bunch.